Mount Gundabad. Welcome to the Fat Man GM's revisitation of the Iron Crown Enterprises Middle-earth role-playing game system from the 80s and early 90s, otherwise known as MERP, right? MERP this, MERP that. It's not like a bad Smurf movie. This is Mount Gundabad, probably made more notorious and famous by the offhand comments made by Radagast and Gandalf and a handful of others in The Hobbit, more than The Lord of the Rings, and Peter Jackson's version of The Hobbit. It gets briefly mentioned in the books someplace, I'm not exactly sure where, but it is the largest city of self-governing orcs in Western Endor, in Western Middle-earth, possibly in all of Middle-earth. And a nice little picture there shows you where it's located, at where the Misty Mountains meet the Gray Mountains, and basically at a pass that allows access to the Great North and or to the former regions of Agmar to the west. It goes back, the history of the place goes back some 4,000 years or longer. It's from after the fall of the Bellerad, when the western Middle-earth was broken off during the fall of Morgoth, or the destruction of Morgoth. A lot of the surviving orcs and goblins and have you fled, and a good chunk of them fled into the far east, but a significant set of tribes stopped and took over this place. This place was probably an outpost, or an orcish outpost, or a small orcish citadel at the time. Would have been considerably the frontier for Morgoth's kingdom, but its central location made it a prime piece of real estate for controlling a lot of stuff, a lot of areas. The source book itself, I like it, and I found it to be an interesting read. I've read it a number of times over the decades, just for the sake of reading it. I also made use of it quite extensively over the years as a good source book material for large humanoid cities, if you will. If you really want to get a taste and flavor of what an orcish city would be like, this is a prime example. There are others out there. I'm not putting my finger on any particularly at the moment, but they exist, and there's nothing wrong with they work too. All right, and making your own works too. But I know that from personal study, the more we know, the more we read, the more variety of things that we've experienced or exposed ourselves to gives us a wider, deeper range of subject material and fuel for the imagination when it comes to world building. It's just my 2 cents worth on that. Mount Gundabad itself is actually controlled by about 4 tribes, if you will, 4 castes or divisions, and there's the priesthood, there's the warrior caste, of course, there's the laborer caste, and not sure exactly how to put the 4th one in place, making it PC friendly, right? But in all seriousness, it is probably as foul and as convoluted and as backstabbing and torturous of a place as you can imagine, and yet it's not totally adverse to allowing outsiders and non-orcs, non-goblins in on a limited basis. So it's not, while rare, not unheard of to encounter human merchants and traders, adventurers, a few dwarves that are morals are questionable, right? I mean, seriously, most of the Western dwarves wouldn't go in here without taking an army with them, and with the intention of cleaning it out. I'm just saying. As for elves, half-elves, very, very extremely unlikely to find one of them in here that aren't a slave or being prepared for a sacrifice. I'm just putting that out there. As a source book goes, I like it because it gives us a lot of material, a lot of information. It kind of fills in the gaps. One of the big things that I've had discussions over off and on over the years about the origin of orcs and the traditional orc as we know it in roleplay, in the role-playing games, in fantasy settings. and a lot of it's attributed to J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, it can be argued that there are other sources and other authors and mythology and so on and so forth. Well, he tapped mythology and put his own twist on it. So there's a whole section on here in the introduction on the coming of the orcs, and then pretty much how they were brought about and what their primary purposes were at the time. And then we have Mount Gundabad during Angmar, and then after 1640, which is shortly after the Great Plague and the destruction of Angmar. The orcs have always been minions of the Dark Lord or his servants, and when they are not directly under control or under the boot heel of Sauron or one of his lieutenants, they will quarrel and fight and mass genocide themselves without quite going into the extinction level. There's at some point it's the strongest dog wins and rules the roost till the next dog takes him down. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a straight-on frontal attack. You can take them from behind to prove that you're stronger by other means. You gain respect to or fear of your fellow orcs and stay in control. It talks about the lands and inhabitants, about Gundabad, climate, flora, fauna. Surprisingly, a lot of fauna and flora living in here. The orcs themselves, their appearance, abilities and weaknesses, attitudes, social structure. There's an entire chapter on this, and it's a good base if you really need some detailed backstory information for these people, these beings, these floobs, for your own game campaign, for your own world building. You got the economy, the religion, their language, lifespan and death. They have a smaller section on trolls. Then we got a subsection on the Northmen that live in the region. Chapter for politics and power. Imagine politics in an Orcish kingdom. Orcish tribes of the mountains. They go on to point out that it's not just the key 4 strongest tribes that actually occupy Mount Gundabad as their home, but there are numerous tribes spread around the Gray Mountains and on both sides of the Misty Mountains and in the Misty Mountains themselves, with the exception of anything south of Goblin Gate. The orcs of Moria are ruled by a different set of warlords, if you will, and are not directly tied to Gundabad, although they do a lot of stuff together, mostly when it's beneficial to both sides and or when one of the Sauron's lieutenants is putting the screws to them. Just saying. The goblins at Goblin Town, well, there's a lot of debate about them. And I have an entry on Goblin Gate and Eagle's Eyrie. There's arguments that there are no real goblins. The goblins are just some bastardized form of the orc. I honestly believe that's not true. I think that they are a natural humanoid species. Rather, argument could be put forward, if you really want to get down and dirty, that they're a twisted version of the halfling, although there's no mention of halflings or hobbits, if you will, in the Beleriand and extreme far western Middle Earth before Morgoth's destruction. They appeared much later, and there's no solid story as to exactly where they originated and how they originated. If they offshoot of the humans or a species unto themselves, well, it's an argument for another day. Then they get the Mount Gundabad and Angmar and military forces, and break down those forces, what they're called, so on and so forth. They got the craft ring, talk about that's one of the 4 controlling I don't want to call them merchants, but they're not directly laborers, but these are the skilled laborers that make any civilized society function well. You can't have a city without your merchants and craft makers. You just can't, even though orcs have to have them. And of course, having all of them be slaves is not going to work. So you always have your share of orcs or humanoids that fill those roles. The common orc, common people, if you will, the common floobs. An overview of Mount Gundabad itself. They give you a crude picture of the 3-peak mountain, how it looks. And of course, you know, it's a subterranean world. There's the famed, feared Drake Gate, as they say. The pits, the fungi caves, the mines, Adventures in the Goblin City. See, now where we are, bridging that gap. First it's orcs, now it's goblins. See, even they weren't 100% sure at the time, and they're kind of trying to cover, you know, both things. Mount Gundabad Forge, one of Miller's most glorious challenges and adventures, as well as most profitable and exciting opportunities. Dangers are evident. 6,000 orcish warriors, back patrols, wargs, monsters, and an array of powerful Orc-lords ward the city of the Goblin King. Blah, blah. Message to the rebels, plots, the breaking of Gond, Three Kings, and see, now we get into the nit and gritty of some of the adventures, the breaking of Gond, the plot, operations, Three Kings and Gundabad, the plot, principal characters, important items, items of power, the layout of Mount Gundabad. They're giving another picture of the interior cutaway. One of the adventures, oddly enough, it's designed for a human-based adventuring group, human and dwarves, maybe even a halfling. A hobbit could be involved in this. You go in and you get hired by one of the factions, one of the warlords inside, or the head goblin himself, because none of them can trust each other. They can't surely trust their minions, so they're going to hire outsiders to spy and to assassinate and to act as a strike team to do things, which ironically enough is apparently something you can get away with doing in a city of orcs and not have the rest of the orcs off you just because you're there. You know, to give some explanations to why, you know, it's like getting a pass from the king. You better have that pass, because otherwise you're fair game. Here's a nice color map that ICE is very well known for making, of showing it. Gundabad. Up right in here, I think. Yeah, right in there. This is one of the few maps that's stuck in my book. I didn't remove it from the book, and I think the reason for that is because there's important material on the backs of the. In fact, that's the reason why I never took it out of the book, because I wanted it part of the deal. We got the subsection on the Great Gate, the Great Spire. That's the central peak. Twisted spire, lots of internal detail, maps. Like I said, I made a lot of use of these over the years as filler and as extensions for other similar locations that I created and had to fire from the hip, because the players went off on a tangent, and instead of backing down the speed of the gameplay and saying, okay guys, we got to call it for the day, I need a week or two to flush out the areas that you're now running into, I'd run over to the bookshelf if I had it handy and yank this thing off the shelf, or one of a similar book of its nature, and tap into it for inspiration on the moment, and then later go back and try to connect the two and smooth out the rough edges. So we got the arenas and the pits and the mines and the forges and Gundabad. Probably few industrial centers in Middle Earth rival Gundabad. Maybe the forges of Gorgroth or Mordor. Maybe we know that the dwarves of Moria would have topped that, but then they're defunct. The dwarves in Erebor were not, while they're craftsmen and engineers and have a significant forge capacity, industrial capacity, they weren't they were more about specialization and high value stuff, as opposed to cranking out mass amounts of war material, for example. Gundabad, on the other hand, that's exactly what it was for, was a machine to crank out lots and lots of material to support the Dark Lord's wars, but they also were not adverse to exporting their items to managed cultures. So they did a lot of brisk trade with the eastern tribes of humans that were threatening the western Endor and the upper Rovarian Valley. So, just saying. Surprise, surprise. An Orcish guard tower, some outsides. You know, your typical good stuff. Then your Master Beast table and NPC table. As the source books go, it's a very useful one. Very cross-game friendly in that aspect. The material, the story stuff in it. So, you know, if you get a chance to pick this up, even in a PDF form these days, it's well worth just the read, right? Just the information that you gain, and the fact that it is quite just change a few names and make a new location on your map in your world, and you've got yourself a nasty orcish city citadel ready to roll, ready to play. Something to consider.